this sermon, we've taken I've just been so grateful for the way you've tracked with me over the last few months, and we've dealt with some really quite complex questions. But this sermon, of all of them, is the most technical. So as we look at different views of the end of history. And so it's really important, if you've got your notes, to have them handy, because there's actually some diagrams that hopefully will be helpful. And the notes in the YouVersion Bible app, if you go there under events, they're slightly more detailed than the printed notes we've got. So if you want more detailed notes, they're there in the digital version. So as we dive in, we've been taking this journey that starts with an incredible vision of who Jesus is. Then there are these letters to the churches, and then there are these 3 lots of 7. And then we come to Revelation chapter 16, and today we'll be talking about Judgment Day, Armageddon, the Millennium, and a bunch of other things that have entered popular consciousness. So we're talking about, what does the Bible say, what doesn't it say, and where is it clear and where isn't it clear? So we need to be clear on what is and isn't clear. As we dive in, I want to start though, for those of you who have done the Foundations course, I want to start by reminding us of another biblical framework that's really important as we look at the book of Revelation. I want to take you, while you've got your finger in Revelation, I just want you to skip back to Exodus chapter 34 and the most important passage in the Old Testament according to the Old Testament. But it's a passage that many of us will skip over. This is the passage in the Old Testament that is most often referred to by the rest of the Old Testament. And it is this moment where Moses has had a horrible day. He's had this incredible literal mountaintop experience with God, goes down with the 10 Commandments, and the people of Israel have gone, up the garden path, led by his brother Aaron, and have built this golden calf. And Moses is so frustrated that he throws down the 10 Commandments and shatters them into a million pieces. And now he's having to walk back up the mountain and say, I don't know, can I get another copy of those 10 Commandments? And in all that, and there's this funny exchange where God says, you guys, I don't know if I'll go with you. And Moses says to him, if you don't come with us, I'm not going anywhere. I can't do this without you. I don't know if you've ever felt like that. And then Moses says, show me your glory. And God says to him, this is in chapter 33, okay, but I don't know if you really know what you're asking. We're going to put you in this little cleft of the rock here. And he passes in front in Exodus 34. And this is, as I said, the most important passage in the Old Testament, because it is referenced by the Old Testament itself more than any other passage. Exodus 34, 6 and 7. What's interesting is we look at the end of history. We'll be looking at 4 major ideas people have about what the end of history will look like, according to their understanding of Revelation, and every one of them use the word glory in terms of understanding what their understanding of what the end of history is going to look like. Glory is clearly an important part of the end of history. But often, because we are here in the 21st century reading an ancient document, we misunderstand what the Bible means by glory. We think that sometimes the glory is like shining lights or applause or something like that. That's kind of in our culture what it means. But when God here reveals his glory to Moses, what he is revealing is who he is. It's his character. He says, he passes in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet He doesn't leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. What we see here is something that in the Foundations course we simplify down to the words justice, mercy, and compassion, because we, being Westerners, don't have as good a memory as Jewish people do. The Jewish people refer to this as the 13 attributes. So they remember each Jewish word and what each word means and the nuances, because each word actually carries its weight. But for us, it's enough to remember that God, as he reveals who he is, he's this initially this beautiful picture, the merciful and compassionate God. But also this picture of justice. And as human beings, we tend to want to be one or the other. We tend to want to be people who, tell off everybody for being naughty people, or who just give everybody a hug no matter what they do. But God is always perfectly just and perfectly merciful and compassionate. You cannot in God separate those things. And so often I think as we've come to Revelation, we've kind of separated those things a bit and thought of God as sort of we've had the gentle Jesus, meek and mild, now we get the big bad Arnold Schwarzenegger looking Jesus who comes to sort things out. It isn't like that. God will always be perfectly merciful and compassionate and just. And that is who God is. And that is who God reveals himself. It's interesting, in the Gospel of John chapter 1 actually it quotes this book of this reference in Exodus as it names who Jesus is and says that Jesus comes as the embodiment of God's glory. And that's who Jesus comes as, the full representation of who God is. As God's glory is actually what John chapter 1 tells us. Won't go too far into that now, but just want to have that as the frame as we now dive into literally what the Bible talks about as the end of history. So we've already seen the end of history 2 other times in Revelation. We've seen the end of the story of the 6 seals, and you'll see that they are, and the 7 seals rather, and you'll see that there's this great earthquake, chapter 6, Revelation chapter 6, verse 12. The sun turns black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turns blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth as figs drop from a fig tree and are shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. So, very clear. It all sounds pretty terminal. That's not, you don't, stars that fall from the sky and mountains get rolled up. This is one account of the end of history in Revelation. There is another account of the end of history in Revelation chapter 11. And again, it's this picture of the earthquake, and it's also both of these you get this sort of foretaste of a battle as the kings of the earth get together. But now, as we turn to Revelation chapter 16, the story comes to a head, and we get a fuller account. This is Revelation chapter 16. We get a fuller account of the armies of the world getting together for battle. And there is this overarching theme right the way through Revelation that there is ultimately 2 ways you can see the world. You can see the world from the heavenly reality, or you can try and do what you want. And if you're trying to do what you want, then you are going to be trying to battle against the heavenly reality. And so we see this, Revelation chapter 16, verse 14, the false prophet and the figure, the beast that we've come to call the Antichrist, although that isn't in Revelation, that word, it's in 1 John. It says they are demonic spirits. It's talking about those that perform signs, and they go out to, these demonic spirits come out from them, and they go to the kings of the whole world to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty. So there's this sense that there is this moment where there's going to be a great day of God Almighty. And like you do in most movies, there's this sort of this sense of building towards this big moment. All these armies are coming together and it's going to be this huge battle. It's kind of what it feels like. Just directly after that, though, we have a short summary of the defeat of Babylon. One of the things you need to understand is Revelation over and over again tells the same story from different perspectives. Like, as we've already said, in chapter 6, the mountains have already crumbled. But here we get this other story and other story. We get about at least 3 different versions of the end of history. And we actually get a few different versions of the end of Babylon. And here we get Revelation 16, verse 19. The great city splits into 3 parts, and the cities of the nation collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. And again, it sort of retelling, every island fled away and the mountains couldn't be found. There is this in a few verses, this summary that Babylon loses the battle in the end and Babylon is judged. But then we actually get 3 whole chapters. It's the topic that is actually talked about most in Revelation, of the defeat of Babylon. From Revelation 17, 18 and 19 are all about the defeat of Babylon. And we get a sense of what all that it's about in chapter 19, where in Revelation 19 verse 1 we see, after this I heard what sounded like the roar of a great multitude in heaven shouting, Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and power belong to our God, for true and just are his judgments. He has condemned the great prostitute, Babylon, who corrupted the earth by her adulteries. He's avenged on her the blood of his servants. One of the themes through Revelation is this cry. People are praying, God, why do you let bad things happen to good people? Why do you let people who are faithful suffer horrendously? And part of the story of Revelation is ultimately God will put the world to rights. Ultimately, justice, the full weight of God's justice will prevail in context of his mercy and compassion. They won't ever be separated, but justice will prevail. And what this picture is, the judgment on Babylon, the system that wants to get you to give it allegiance, the system that wants to get your eyes on you and off Jesus, it's saying that system itself will be judged. That system itself, and it is clear from, as we look at the 7 churches, John is trying to shake them up and from their comfortable sense of this is just normal, this is how we do things. And in some ways, I think Revelation is trying to shake us up from our comfortable, this is just normal, this is how we do things. It is a call to be faithful in the face of a normal that is anti-Christ. Our world is anti-Christ. It is designed, the system of our world, the Bible uses the word cosmos, the system of our world is trying to get you to take your eyes off Jesus and put your eyes on yourself. And it uses all kinds of tactics to do that. And we get this moment when finally what people call Judgment Day happens as Jesus turns up. But we need to understand the symbolism of this passage, Revelation chapter 19. I saw heaven standing open. Verse 11. And so there is this moment, it's clear now all of a sudden Jesus has come from heaven. There's this promise in Revelation, there is going to be a second coming. But we see that this is deeply symbolic language. And often we get this picture that somehow there's going to be this really, this battle that's going to involve tanks and guns and all that kind of stuff. Well, here we see Jesus come, and look how he defeats his enemies here. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. His eyes are like a blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. We've already seen that I think Satan has about 5 crowns and the beast has 7. What Revelation is saying is, yeah, they got nothing. On Jesus' head is many crowns. What it's saying symbolically is Jesus has far, far more authority than Satan or the beast ever had. Is what the language of that is. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. And then there's a quote from the Psalms there. So how does Jesus win this battle? What weapon does he use? A sword. It is very clearly. Now, again, I was having this conversation this week. A lot of people have lots of discussions about which bits of Revelation are symbolic and which bits aren't. I think everybody agrees that Jesus doesn't have a literal sword coming out his mouth. That it is clear that the sword is the Word of God, it is the truth. And remember, Jesus is the creator of the universe who created the whole cosmos with a word. He actually doesn't need us to, saddle up and get ready to take. He's pretty strong. He's got it covered. And he defeats the lies of the enemy with truth, as Pax was saying. Now, like the rest of Revelation, almost every word in this picture of Jesus, and I can't go to... I've realised if we really took a deep dive into Revelation, we would have had to set aside 5 years. So I haven't been able to take a deep dive into every passage like I would have loved to. And this one, we could have spent 3 months just on this picture of Jesus alone. But like the rest of Revelation, this whole picture has got all kinds of Old Testament references. But probably the major one is Isaiah 63, verses 1 to 3. It says, "Who is this coming from Edom, from Basra, with his garments stained in stained crimson? Who is this, robed in splendor, striding forward in the greatness of his strength? It is I, proclaiming victory, mighty to save. Why are your garments red like those of one treading the winepress? I have trodden the winepress alone. From the nations no one was with me. I trampled them in my anger and trod them down in my wrath. Their blood splattered my garments and stained all my clothing." So again, what this picture, this is Yahweh speaking. And one of the things that comes through over and over and over again in Revelation is Jesus is Yahweh. Jesus is God. And Revelation leaves, and there's no ambiguity about that. And it is this picture, and this is one of the things we have to come to terms with. It is this picture of the injustices of the world being put to rights. That ultimately, all the little kids who put up with things that little kids shouldn't have to put up with, all the victims of abuse, the victims of murder, the victims of corruption, need to know that ultimately there will be justice from a God of justice, but also a God of mercy and compassion. And for us as human beings, we find it hard to work that out. We can think in terms of mercy and compassion or justice, but in himself, God is never either or. He is always both. And so we see this picture and Jesus coming in as this promise so that ultimately there will be a moment of justice. Now, one of the things that we often miss in Revelation, because there's a whole lot of preparation for the Battle of Armageddon, and it uses the word Armageddon a bit, but it's actually a bit of an anticlimax. If you look at chapter 19, verse 19 to 21, then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to wage war against the rider of the horse and his army. Okay, you kind of picture the Hollywood scene, can't you? It's ready for a great battle of hordes charging against hordes. What does the next verse say? But the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who had performed signs on his behalf. There is actually no battle of Armageddon. It's dealt with like that. You see, the creator of the universe doesn't have a problem dealing with Satan or the beasts. He conquers with the power of his word. It's done like that. And there are versions of Christianity that look to Revelation kind of as a justification for violence. And they're missing the point. God doesn't need you to take up your shotgun. But he does invite you to a battle. A battle that is a theme right the way through the book of Revelation that is crystallized in chapter 12, where Jesus names how we defeat Satan. By the blood of the Lamb, so through his work, not through us trying hard, through the power of our testimony, through a willingness to tell the truth, and through a willingness to die. That is the call on Christians. That is the theme right the way through Revelation. We are called to step into the grace that is truly grace through the power of Jesus Christ. To be willing to tell people about how he's changed our lives. And to be willing to die. That is the battle we are called to. A battle not to put our own agenda first, but to put his agenda first. That is the battle. We're not actually called, God's not going to need you to pull out your M16 on the day of Armageddon. Jesus has it covered, but he does have a battle that he's inviting you to fight. And he's inviting you to fight it right now, not just at the end of history. We then get the story of the judgment of Satan. So the beasts are judged, and this judgment of Satan introduces us to one of the most discussed and most disagreed about bits of the Bible. Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 to 3, and I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the keys to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil, or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss, and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. So this introduces this notion of 1,000 years, which has come to be called in Christian theology and popular culture the millennium. And Christians have had long discussions about what that actually means. Christians since the very early church have had different understandings. We have documents from the first 150 years of the church where Christians are disagreeing already about what the millennium means. So one of the themes we'll see through church history is this is not a salvation issue. That it is the core of our salvation is whether we love Jesus or not and have handed our life to him or not. It's not what we think is going to happen at the end of time, because ultimately, I don't know how to break the news to you, what is going to happen at the end of time is going to happen at the end of time, whether you like it or not, and probably none of us fully get it. Probably none of us fully get it. this chapter in Revelation goes on and talks more about this period of the Revelation in verses 4 of the millennium, in verse 4 to 6. But we want to take a moment to look at the four main ways people interpret this idea of a millennium. Like I said, this is one of the more technical sermons we're going to do on Revelation. But one of the things I love about being a Baptist is we have fought really hard. That we came out of a tradition that means we value the freedom of conscience of each individual, and we believe you have to take your own journey with Jesus. And so I had somebody tell me, just tell me what to think about this. And I'm not going to tell you what to think about this. I'm going to tell you through church history what major leaders in the Christian church have thought about the millennium, and you're going to have to work out with God. It is important to wrestle with the end of history and your view on it. But as I said, you're going to find out that some pretty significant people have had different views on this. So the first view we'll look at is what is termed the Pan-Millenial view. Now, just to introduce you to this diagram that I whipped up a little earlier, you'll see one of the assumptions in Revelation is that there is a heavenly realm where Jesus reigns with God the Father, and where all the people who are praying, we see this picture of people praying to God, how long, that's where those that have gone before us are in the heavenly realm on this side of eternity. Then you'll see that there is a time when Jesus comes back. There is a final judgment. And in the amillennial view, actually in all the views, one of the things it's important to say is all the views end in the same place, where there is an overlap of heaven and earth. And I can't wait till next week to share with you about the future we're looking forward to on the other side of Judgment Day. But we've got to get through Judgment Day first. And so this is the amillennial view would say that the 1,000 years is symbolic and started when Jesus bound Satan on the cross. And that the challenges the church has had since then are reflected in the challenges that are spoken about by Revelation. And we get that they would point to Revelation chapter 12, how the angel in Revelation chapter 12 binds and deals with Satan and casts him out of the heavens and takes his authority away because of what Jesus does on the cross. A lot of different people have thought this in terms of church history. Probably the man regarded as probably the greatest theologian in history, Augustine, held this view in his work. I've lost the book in my head. Anyway, he this incredible 2-volume study of history he put together. But also a couple of other names that probably will be familiar. You heard of Martin Luther, John Calvin. The fathers of the Reformation would have held an amillennial view. Okay? So that's the amillennial view. So some people believe, so we're going to look at the next view now, which is the post-millennial view. Some people believe that the millennium actually started after the temple's destruction in AD 70. So that's when the millennium started, when the temple was destroyed. It's impossible to overstate how big a deal it was for Jewish people that the temple was destroyed in AD 70. And that they would say that Jesus' reign on earth began then through the church. And what will happen is that the world will get increasingly better and better and better because of the church in the world. The father of the Great Awakening in America, Jonathan Edwards, held this view. And it was popular in the 1800s, but it got reality checked. It lost a lot of its steam in World War I, as we realised this world's not getting a lot better. And so that's the post-millennial view, that the millennium has started and that Jesus will come with the second coming and final judgment. Okay, so that's post-millennial. Now, we have two versions of premillennialism. There is, so this is the first version. This is what they would call, so premillennial. The premillennial understanding, this would be called historic premillennialism, is this sense that we are before the second coming, before the millennium, that Jesus is somehow going to come and begin a millennium reign on earth, that after which the new heavens and the new earth will come. This, as I said, is sometimes called historic premillennialism. One of the early church fathers, Irenaeus, held this view. So did Justin Martyr. Charles Spurgeon would have held this view. And a current influencer in the Christian church, a man by the name of John Piper, would hold that view. It's sort of historic premillennialism. As I'm having to whip through all this, but I'm hoping it's kind of making sense. You see on the timelines, we're sort of placing us where we would be in these views. And this final view would be the dispensational premillennialism, where people expect the Christians to be taken up to heaven with a rapture. Now, they will disagree whether that is before, during, or after. So there's a pre-tribulation rapture some people believe in. Some people believe in a mid-tribulation rapture, and some people believe in a post-tribulation rapture. But it's sort of one or the other. And they would see that normally, and again, there's a whole rate, with all these things, this is an oversimplification. You've got to hear this. It's an oversimplification, but they would see that the rapture was going to last 7 years, reflecting the 7 bowls in Revelation, and that Jesus would come at the end of that tribulation, and the church would now be no longer on the planet, and Jesus would come and be based in Jerusalem and work through the Jewish people. Some people believe that the Old Testament feasts and everything will be reintroduced at that point, sort of going back to an Old Testament covenant. Now, this way of seeing things was first named in the 1830s by a man by the name of John Nelson Darby, who then went to America and communicated that to one of the great evangelists, D.L. Moody. It became the basis for the Schofield Bible, which is one of the most common study Bibles through the 20th century. Chuck Swindoll would hold this view, David Jeremiah would hold this view, and probably Billy Graham would have held this view of the end times. So you can see, one of the things I want to say, so I'd love to have more time to unpack all this, but one of the things you can see is throughout the history of the church, people have seen this differently. And it'd be true to say most premillennial and all dispensational premillennial views see a necessary role for the state of Israel in the end times. But other views would see it differently to that. They see the establishment of the political nation of Israel as a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies to re-establish Israel in the Promised Land. The view doesn't distinguish clearly between the secular state of Israel, the Jewish people, and Judaism. But again, I'm just doing broad brushstrokes here to give you a bit of an overview. There are lots of different views within each of these 4 views. We can probably take that off now, Joe. Thanks for that. From my personal perspective, I hold this stuff pretty loosely. My personal view is that Jesus is coming back, and I'm really pleased about that. And I'm not convinced that anybody fully understands how it's going to work. It does seem to me, not from Revelation so much, but from reading Romans, that God does have a future plan for the Jewish people. Romans chapter 11 seems to indicate that somehow in conjunction with Jesus' return, there will be a turning to him by a whole lot of Jewish people. But I don't think that the timing of that is clear, and the level at which the political state of Israel is involved in that is also not clear in the Bible, in my view. I want to say that you can hold any of these four views and be a Christian and be a fully important part of life at Citywide. And in the Baptist system and through the history of the church, there have been wonderful people used by God who have held any of those four views. I want to warn a little about, for those of you who hold the dispensational view or the premillennial view, it can lead to an unquestioning support for the political nation of Israel and doesn't give space to critique that nation when they act in ways that are clearly against God's justice, mercy, and compassion. The Old Testament was clear. The prophets, whenever the nation of Israel went against the glory of God, the prophets would turn up and say, "What are you doing?" And any view that doesn't allow us to differentiate between the state of Israel and what God's up to, it can be problematic. We live in an increasingly polarised time that doesn't cope well with nuance. There are people who see Jewish people as evil. That is a blatant form of racism. And we've got the label anti-Semitism for that. On the other hand, it is important to be able to acknowledge that the state of Israel does things that are wrong. All states do. That's simply the truth. Truth is always the standard that followers of Jesus need to uphold, and truth is complicated. There just was no excuse for the horrific terror attack that happened on October 6th last year, or October 7th our time. There is only one word for that was evil. But it is also tragic and deeply concerning that the BBC report that Israel has since killed 42,000 people in response to that attack. Both those statements are true. And any temptation to want to walk away from and oversimplify things is a dangerous temptation in my view. What's clear is the exact order of events in the end times isn't clear. I don't think the relationship between the church and Israel is crystal clear in the New Testament. And the role of Israel in the end times is also, in my view, not crystal clear. I'm not saying, for me, I'm not at a point where I can say, this is exactly how it's going to be. Your view on how the end times unfold is not the most important thing. John quotes Jesus himself. And one of the things that I find helpful in Revelation, there are a couple of times where John says, this is what this symbolism means. And there are other times where Jesus himself speaks and gives a word directly to the church. And I find it interesting that before John enters into this discussion of the end of history, he quotes Jesus directly, and in my view, speaking directly to us. He says in Revelation chapter 16, verse 15, this is Jesus speaking, "Look, I come like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed, so as not to go naked and be shamefully exposed." He's saying, be prepared. It's probably not going to happen as you think it is. And in fact, John, I don't know if he's consciously doing it or if Jesus is just saying it twice, but he's repeating what he said in Matthew chapter 24, where he said, "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, If the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and wouldn't have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. The one thing I am confident about the end times is it won't be exactly what anybody expects, is the one thing I'm confident about, because that's what Jesus says. What is clear is that we are to live expectantly for Jesus' return, and we should make sure our lives reflect our hope. It's interesting, Jesus says himself, "Blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed." And then a couple of chapters later, John says, there's this beautiful picture of the wedding of the Lamb as Jesus comes to connect with his people, this picture that we see unpacked in Ephesians. And he actually describes what it means to be clothed. He says, fine linen, bright and clean, was given to her to wear. And this is why I'm pleased that there are times in Revelation where it's really clear. Here it's really clear. Fine linen, stands for the righteous acts of God's holy people. So what Jesus is saying is, you don't know when I'm coming back, but be prepared and be acting on the basis of your faith, not acting on the basis of what's comfortable or what even, I find interesting, the picture is don't fall asleep. Don't let your body run the show, but make choices that line up with your faith and be ready and expectant for Jesus' return. We are to live every day as though this might be it and one day we'll be right. So far, everybody who has been absolutely sure about when it's all going to happen has been 100% wrong. By the way, I'm told that there are prophecies doing the rounds at the moment saying that the millennium started on October 7th this year. I don't know what to say about that. If that did happen, then I think we're saying that there wasn't a pre-tribulation rapture, I think. But and I don't want to make too light of it, but I do want to be clear that it is right to wrestle with what the end times will mean, but it's more important to keep your eyes on Jesus. It's what he says. We don't know exactly how it worked, but we do know that Satan is defeated easily. Again, there's this picture of a final battle, and again, there's this picture of an army gathering in chapter 20, verse 7 to 10. All these nations come, they march across the breadth of the earth and surround the camp of God's people, the city he loves, but fire comes down from heaven and deals with them. It's like, at no point in Revelation is there any contest of a battle. The battles are always very one-sided. Satan has no authority against Jesus. He doesn't get to win a battle. Satan was defeated on the cross. I find it interesting that the final things to be judged are not people and not Satan, they're not the beasts, but death itself and Hades. We see at the end of Revelation chapter 20, verse 15, that death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire. That death itself is defeated after Satan's defeated. I'm grateful that Jesus himself speaks at the end of Revelation and kind of says this is the stuff that's important to take from this book. He says this, look, I'm coming soon. My reward is with me, and I will give to each person according to what they've done. I am the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may go through the gates into the city. Outside are the dogs, those who practice magic arts, the sexually immoral, the murderers, the idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. I, Jesus, have sent my angel to give you this testimony for the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David and the bright morning star. Jesus says, and we need to get used to the idea that there is judgment. Ultimately, the world will be put to rights. Every victim of abuse, victim of murder, every victim of corruption will find they are in the arms of an ever-loving God, and the what was wrong will be put to right. There will be justice in the world. Revelation is written to say, pick a side. There is a God who loves you and is calling you to life and is calling the whole world to life. But it wouldn't be a loving God that didn't deal with injustice. And so we have this picture of Judgment Day, but it's ultimately an answer to the prayer of God's people who say, how long, O Lord? And Jesus is the answer to that question. He comes as the embodiment of God's justice, mercy, and compassion. And we can trust him. It's a little bit of a theological joke, if you don't mind me saying this at the end, but I think it's actually true. Like I'm not holding any of those four positions tightly. What I am holding tightly is the idea of being a pan-millennialist. A pan-millennialist is somebody who believes it's all going to pan out in the end. Because that is what Revelation teaches, and that is what we can be certain. You can trust a God who loves you and who is just, merciful, and compassionate. He's a lot bigger than you can fit in your brain, and probably the people to worry a little bit about are people who are absolutely sure they've got his number, because he's bigger than anything any of us can fit in our brain. Let's pray. Jesus, we acknowledge a lot of this stuff does bend our brain, and depending on our histories, we will have been shaped by those histories to see things in particular ways. Help us, Jesus, see things through your eyes. Help us be open to the full breadth of your word, to the full breadth of your redemptive story. And if anything in what I have communicated this morning has been wrong, help it fall away. Help us together to look to you and nobody or nothing else. Thank you that our life is in you. We acknowledge we need your help. In your name, Jesus. Amen.